1990 would go even a step further. Now, 2 African teams qualified, as was status quo at this point, to the World Cup. Egypt and Cameroon. Egypt was over there. They qualified in a group with England, Netherlands, and Ireland. That's a stark group, man. That's a crazy group. And in fact, this group was so tight that out of the 6 games played in that group, 5 of them were draws. So that's one of the most tight groups in World Cup history. Egypt drew 1-1 with Netherlands, 0-0 with Ireland, then lost their final match to England. And Egypt's only goal of the tournament was scored by Magdi Abdelghani against the Netherlands in that draw. And Egypt was eliminated from the World Cup, right? Meaning, as of 1990, remember, this is that long break from the 56 years we spoke about. This was their great comeback, to the World Cup after 1934. And they also still haven't won a match at this point. Cameroon are, without a doubt, the story of the World Cup of 1990. Without a doubt, right? In their first match, Cameroon, they've already been to the World Cup. Remember, we saw them in 1982, where they were eliminated in the first round. But in their first match, they shot Argentina, who are the defending champions, by the way, Diego Maradona and them, by winning 1-0 through a goal by Francois Omam-Biyik, even though they finished the game with 9 men. And that part is right about Cameroon. So they defeat Argentina 1-0. In the next match, they come up against Romania, and they beat Romania 2-1 thanks to 2 goals from 38-year-old substitute Roger Milla. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned Roger Milla because he had come in and he had a goal disallowed against Peru, which many people feel like was wrongly disallowed in 1982. But he was already kind of getting up there. He was 32 in 1980. He was 30 in 1982. So now he's 38, and he comes on as a sub and he scores 2 goals. Incredible. So now, with the 2 wins, they've already qualified to the next round, right? Then they finally, their third game, they lost 4-0 against an already eliminated Soviet Union. So, they were playing a gear down because they knew they'd already qualified to this round of 16. Now remember, this loss against the Soviet Union is their first actual loss in the World Cup, because in 1982 they drew all 3 of their games, right? Then they've won their first 2. So this was the last year. In the second round, Cameroon goes on to defeat Colombia 2-1, with again Roger Milla coming on as a second half substitute to score twice, famously dispossessing El Loco, I think they called him. René Higuita was the Colombian goalkeeper. If you remember him, is the guy with the scorpion kick and the crazy hair. But because he played so eccentrically, he was dispossessed by Roger Milla, who goes on to score 2 goals. And this is the point where Roger Milla's famous post-goal dance at the corner flag became synonymous. And it's arguably, I think, the most popular World Cup celebration ever. At least in the top 3, top 5 for sure. Indeed. So he's got 4 goals off the bench at 38. Incredible. Roger Milla. I don't think the World Cup legends come any bigger than that. In the quarterfinals, with like 7 minutes left, there were 7 minutes from qualifying for the semi-finals. Then England were awarded a penalty. Then England went on to win 3-2 after extra time, with 3 of the goals coming in as penalties. So this is how the scoring went. David Platt scored first. Then Emmanuel Kunde with a penalty, right, to equalize. Then Eugene Ekeke, 3 minutes later, takes the lead 2-1 in the 65th minute. Then a penalty in the 83rd by Lineker, right? Then so it's 2-2, and they go into the extra time. Then Lineker gets another penalty, or England gets another penalty, and Lineker scores again another penalty to make it to the semi-finals. So close. 7 minutes away from qualifying to the semi-finals. Insane, right? Because up until now, remember, we've been talking about the dominance of the North African teams, but now we have a West African team that has entered the foray, and they come this close to making it to the semi-finals. That's 1990. It wouldn't be another 32 years before an African team finally made it to the semi-finals. But it's not the last time they would come agonizingly close. But we'll get to that. In 1994, the number of spots for Africa in the World Cup goes from 2 to 3. Now, this is on the strength of Cameroon almost making it to the semi-finals, and the fact that the teams in recent times, Morocco and Egypt in the last World Cup, had comported themselves pretty well as well. And this time, more and more African teams are qualifying. Remember, we went from Egypt being the only one signing up for the first 3 or 4 World Cups, then to 3 with Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, which, by the way, interestingly, have fallen by the wayside now. We don't hear about them at all, right? To 3 teams, to 7, to 17. Now, 40 teams entered the qualification for these 3 spots by 1994, right? And there's a very sad story here. In Group B, right? Because in that Group C I was talking about was Cameroon, Zimbabwe, and Guinea. In Group B, a tough group, there was Morocco, Senegal, and Zambia. Now in the first match, Morocco beat Senegal. In the second match, Zambia were going to face Senegal. However, the plane carrying the Zambian team crashed on the way to Senegal, to Dakar, on 28 April 1993. And the crash, which is blamed on mechanical problems and pilot error, killed all 30 people on board, including the entire team that was on board, and coaches, support staff, and the plane crew. Only 2 European-based players from the original squad missed the flight. Charles Musonda, who played for Anderlecht, who was injured, and Captain Kalusa Bralia, who played for PSV Eindhoven and was flying from Europe to join the team in Dakar. Sad, sad, sad moment. Incredibly tragic moment. So all the matches in the group were postponed for the month, which doesn't even seem like enough time. But Zambia put together a new team, which was captained by Kalusa Bralia, and they actually went on to defeat Morocco in Lusaka in the first match with the new team, with Kalusa Bralia and Johnson Bralia, who they're not related, though they have the last name. However, they lost the final group match to Morocco, and Morocco went on to qualify. Fascinating stuff, because Zambia would go on to qualify for the African Cup of Nations in 1994 and make it all the way to the finals with a team that has been hastily assembled after the entirety of their team, except 2 players, had been killed in a plane crash. So not only is that a loss of so much talent, the very cream of the crop, it is also, can you imagine what that does to the spirits of the folks? Maybe that buoyed them. Maybe that's why they performed so well. But that's for the African Cup of Nations. Now back to the World Cup. So we have Cameroon, we have Morocco, who made it, then we have Nigeria, who also make it. And in Nigeria, this was the standout African team of the tournament, right? They were in Group D at the World Cup, where they first played against Bulgaria, who Bulgaria, by the way, went on to make it to the semi-finals, and Nigeria beat them 3-0. Then they lost 1-2 to Argentina. Then they went on to beat Greece 2-0. And in a crazy, this hardly happens, right? Nigeria, Bulgaria, and Argentina all finished on 6 points and all qualified for the second round because they would do the third place finisher would also qualify. So those 2 teams made it. In the second round, Nigeria faced Italy in the round of 16. Emmanuel Amuneke scored in the 25th minute. And with 2 minutes to go, right, Roberto Baggio equalizes to make it 1-1. And then Baggio scored again in extra time for Italy to go through to the quarterfinals, eventually making it to the finals where they played Brazil. So that's interesting. Again, Cameroon had come this close to making it to the quarterfinals, and Nigeria was 2 minutes away from making it to the second round in their first ever World Cup. This was the third successive World Cup where an African team progressed beyond the first stage. Morocco in 1986, remember, was the first one. Then Cameroon making it to the quarterfinals in 1990. And this was a major factor in FIFA increasing Africa's allocation from 3 to 5 spots as the World Cup expanded to 32 teams in 1998. 1998 holds special sentimental value to me. It is the first World Cup, and I'm dating myself here. It is the first World Cup. I'd watched a little bit of the 1994 World Cup, but as a picking, but it's the first World Cup that I can say I watched and remember in great detail. It's probably the World Cup, maybe that and the 2002 World Cup that I remember in some great detail, even more than more recent ones. So and of course, 30, a lot of African teams tried to qualify, but eventually 5 teams made it. Cameroon, who had already been there and made it to the quarterfinals in 1990. Morocco, who had qualified several times and had been the first team to make it to the second round. Nigeria, who had qualified for the first time in 1994 and made it to the second round, coming agonizingly close to the quarterfinals. And Tunisia, who's back to the tournament after they were the first African team to ever win a game at the World Cup back in the day. So they're back now, and there's a new team too here. Dum 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 dum. Yeah, Bafana fans will know what that's a reference to. That's South Africa making their debut at the World Cup. Remember, they've been banned from FIFA for decades, and they were only readmitted in 1992, and they came out guns blazing, right? In fact, their name Bafana means the boys, and they were initially named that because when they played against some of the bigger teams in the region, in the continent, Cameroon and so forth, they were just losing left, right, and center. So it was almost like men versus boys. But they soon reappropriated that and started playing some sweet ball. And in 1996, they had actually won the African Cup of Nations. Incredible. Y'all remember that team, man. That's the team with Mark Fish, Lucas Radebe, the likes of Dr. Kumalo, Mark Williams, right? Andre Arenze. But now they've qualified to the World Cup for the first time. Incredible comeback story. This is all part of their great comeback, because also think in rugby they had that Invictus moment in 1995. So really the Rainbow Nation, Bafana, Mzansi, South Africa is back. And if you can tell, I love South Africa, man, its problems notwithstanding. But in any case, they're back. And the 5 African teams all took European coaches. Yeah, 3 Frenchmen, 1 Serb, and 1 Pole, making it the first time since 1974 that there was no African coach at the World Cup. Which, some people will say it's whatever, but I'll also say this, that no World Cup winning team has been coached by a coach from a different country, right? Not yet, anyway. It hasn't happened. So there's something to be said for that. And the same, I think, goes for the Euros as well. Indeed. But the tournament was pretty fascinating, and I'll go through it in some detail here because I remember a lot of this since I was, like I said, it's the first one that I watched. In Group A, Morocco played very well. This is the era of Mustafa El Hajj, I believe he was the talisman, where they drew their first match against Norway, then lost 3-0 to Brazil. Then the last two matches were played simultaneously because Lord knows you don't want the disgrace of Gihon happening again. And with 10 minutes to go, Morocco was leading Scotland 2-0, while Brazil was leading Norway 1-0. And if that had stood, that would have meant that Brazil and Morocco go through. But Norway scored twice in the 83rd and 88th minute to beat Brazil 2-1. So even though Morocco ended up winning 3-0 against Scotland, it was Norway and Brazil that qualified to the second round. Once again, an African team had come within the last 10 minutes, in this case 7 minutes, to qualify to the second round. And in this case it hurt more because it wasn't them letting it slip. It was Brazil that let it slip. Cue the conspiracy theories, which at the time made sense to me, but now I don't see why Brazil could have possibly been interested more in Norway making it than in Morocco making it. In Group B, Cameroon didn't perform too well, but there's one record that's worth mentioning here, because in the Group B, in the last match against Chile, Rigobert Song, who was the coach at this World Cup, of the 2022 World Cup, legendary Cameroonian defender Rigobert Song, became the first man to pick up red cards at 2 World Cups. He had been sent off again as a 17-year-old against Brazil in 1994. Which, remember, in that tournament where they got to the quarterfinals in 1990, in their first match against Argentina, they were down to 9 men. So Cameroon does this, man. I love them, but they do this. So Rigobert Song would be the first man. Imagine earning a red card against Brazil at 17 years old, then doing it again 4 years later. The second man to be red carded twice at the World Cup, anyone want to take any guesses? Is not an African. At least not an African in terms of who he represents at the World Cup. It's the great Zinedine Zidane. Zizou. Indeed. In Group C, right, South Africa began their World Cup campaign, right, their first ever World Cup game with a 3-0 loss to France, who were the host and the eventual champions. There's a very interesting conspiracy theory about a player named Pierre Issa, who played in that South African team. I think he had an own goal, considered a penalty, but he's of French descent, So a lot of people felt that he was a double agent. Make of that what you will. Look that up yourselves. I don't buy it. I think it was just bad or just was unlucky. But in any case, that's been posited. Then South Africa went on to draw 1-1 against Denmark in the following game, with Benny McCarthy, right, who would go on to play for Blackburn Rovers, win the Champions League with Porto. Jose Mourinho's Porto. He scores his first goal in the World Cup. So they needed to win big against Saudi Arabia in the third game to make it to the second round, but they drew 2-2 against Saudi Arabia, where they gave away 2 penalties and only equalized in injury time with a penalty from Sean Bartlett. So not a bad first outing. 2 draws, right? And if they could have won one of them, they could have possibly made it to the second round. Group D now, that's the team. Nigeria, this was a great outing here. They beat fancied Spain 3-2. That's Spain with Hierro, Raul, and the likes. Then they beat Bulgaria 1-0. Then in the third game, they sort of take their foot off the pedal and they lose 1-3 to Paraguay. But they make it to the second round together with Paraguay. So they qualify to the second round and they face up against Denmark, right? So they're looking pretty good. But Denmark was hard. This was the era of Peter Schmeichel, who's the father to Kasper Schmeichel, who we may younger viewers may be more familiar with. Brian Laudrup, the Great Dane, Michael Laudrup, right? These players, this is peak Denmark, and now Nigeria were no slouches either, right? As the team with people like Nwankwo Kanu, JJ Okocha, so good they named him twice. Sunday Olise, Finidi George, a few of those players have been on that Ajax team that won the Champions League a couple years earlier. Babayaro, Babangida, that Peter Rufai in goals, man. Stop me. Who else? Taribo West in defense. So, love that team. But they ended up losing 4-1. Man, I remember that match so keenly. It's one of the games that is just stuck in my head because there was so much hope and optimism. But ultimately, the Danes came out on top. In Group G, Tunisia lost their first two matches, 0-2 and 0-1, right, to England and Colombia, respectively. Then they drew 1-1 with Romania. The only reason I think this is even worth mentioning is because this is so Tunisia, right? A record like that, 2-0, 1-0, then a 1-1 draw at the end, is typical. And you'll see that as we go through the years. They might have like a 1-0 win in there, right? Indeed. But, so they were eliminated. Thus, 2 of Africa's 5 representatives came away with at least one win. However, there was an African representative in the second round of the World Cup for the 4th time in succession. Remember, we had Morocco in 1986, right? Played very well. We had Cameroon in 1990 making it to the quarterfinals and within a few minutes of the semifinals. Then we have had Nigeria in 94 and 98. So Nigeria are looking really hot as we go into the 21st century.